Who Cares About Watchmen? Episode 1. It's summer and we're running out of ice. Before we dive into spoilers and a nice hearty discussion of the episode, I think we should very quickly just introduce ourselves and our experiences both with Watchmen and with the showrunner Damon Lindelof first. So, I'm Neo, I'm an Australian who's been an avid fan of the comic Watchmen for over a decade now, and Damon Lindelof, I thought his last show, The Leftovers, was just fantastic, absolutely perfect show, so I had a lot of faith and excitement for this show here. In Giga, who is a Britishman like Alan Moore, the writer of the comic, what is your experiences with both Watchmen and Lindelof, the writer of the show, been?
I'd say I'm probably our resident Alan Moore defender. Last few years I've read a ton of his stuff, and I read Watchmen a while back. I sort of read it once because it's kind of like the requisite thing, and I sort of left it a while, but obviously I really liked it. It's a fantastic work, and the structural intricacy of it was just a huge deal, very impressive. And as for Lindelof, I watched The Leftovers sort of over the past year and had a really good time with it. Really impressive show. So yeah, I was very much excited and super optimistic about this.
And from America, we have Mirrors. I know you like the Watchmen comic, but I'm not sure your thoughts on Lindelof. Do you have any brief thoughts on him to share?
Well, I actually am kind of a big fan of his work. I really liked Prometheus, honestly I did. And for that matter, I really like Cowboys and Aliens too. And I know you think that I'm joking, but I will actually defend that movie, even though it is utterly indefensible.
Okay, that's quite the take.
Yeah.
And lastly, we have Tom Tit, an Australian like me, also a fan of the comic, and just recently watched The Leftovers. How did that affect your expectations for the show?
Well, before I got into The Leftovers, which I started pretty much like within the last few months, I had zero interest for this show whatsoever because the trailers were... I wasn't sure what I was actually being sold.
Right.
And I wasn't sure how it related to the original book or anything, which I first read in my early teens when I sort of didn't really have any understanding of the political context of that book. Just because, I was, just a youngin'. Like, the formal experimentation of it was what really grabbed me. But yeah, no, watching The Leftovers was kind of like a game changer, After I watched that, I was like, yeah, I'm ready for this.
Oh, yeah.
Although it's notable that Damon Lindelof was not the only showrunner on The Leftovers.
Yes.
That was a collab with Tom Perrotta.
Yes.
So this is really my first solo Lindelof television experience.
The notable absence there was Lost, which he also showran with another man. Watchmen, he's showrunning alone, so it's new territory for him as well. Before we actually start discussing the episode, I'm just going to very briefly recap it. Of course, we're in spoiler territory now. So the episode opens on the Tulsa race massacre of 1921, a real-world historical event, not part of the alternate history, a real thing that happened. Seen as the worst incident of racial violence in American history. Then we go to the present day, and a member of a white supremacist cult-type organization attacks a police officer, which reignites a war between the police and this culty organization from a few years ago. Then our main character, Angela Abar, aka Sister Knight, suits up, catches a possible member of the white supremacist cult. He gets interrogated, he gets tortured, they manage to get the location they're looking for out of him. Then at that location, there's a big fight between the cops and the cult involving turrets and cows and planes and an owl ship, and the cops win. Meanwhile, in somewhere that looks like Wales, Jeremy Irons is touched by the gift of a watch from one of his odd servants.
Touched by a bit more than that.
Back in Tulsa, the police chief leaves to go check on the cop attacked at the start of the episode. He drives off alone to do this. He's caught on the road. Our main character, Sister Knight, gets a mysterious call about him, and she is led to a tree where the police chief's been lynched, and below him there's that boy we saw in the Tulsa race massacre sequence at the start, all very, very, very grown up. So, what did we actually think of the episode? Gig, you go first. What did you think?
Okay, I loved it. I thought it was... from the opening seconds when we have that silent film introduction, immediately, it grabbed me because right there, we have the kind of the crossing of format, the awareness of kind of the different genres and their histories, and immediately it was really kind of an opening statement in terms of how they're going to work in the racial dynamics and the expectations around those with this idea of sort of masked adventurers and stuff like that. And and tonally, the whole way through, it was just weird and strange enough to just appeal to me immensely. So I had a great time. I just really liked it.
What did our resident American think about the episode?
Man, I'm really upset at how much I liked this. Because I don't feel like I have a whole lot of friction to contribute to the dynamic tonight. I loved it. And especially now that Gig said all of that, it's just going to sound like I'm repeating it, but more slack-jawed. It was a lot truer to the text than I was expecting it to be, if I'm being totally honest. I thought, frankly, that it was going to be a bit goofy or a bit Snydery, but actually they really are digging into like the sense of the lived-in world and the way that shots are sort of imagery is mirrored from one part to the next. The headlights going down the road constantly, circles constantly panning around, an airplane starting and finishing the episode.
Yeah, that's a good touch.
And plus the trunk.
Yes.
I thought really interesting.
Tom, what did you think about the premiere?
Yeah, I'll have to echo everyone else. I loved it. At the same time, I really have no idea what to make of it at this juncture. Like, I could just spend probably an hour just listing questions and things I don't understand about it so far. But the thing which really struck me about it was how everyone involved in making this has created such like a palpable sense of dread from the get-go. And it's probably like better in that sense than anything I've seen on TV in a while.
It's funny you mention that sense of dread, because I started feeling that as soon as Lindelof was announced as the writer. As far as the lived-in world that Mears was talking about, so kind of the world building, I'm not sure if we're all aware of this, but you know in the original comic how at the end of each issue, each chapter, there's a couple of pages that are like extracts from books or advertising material, back matter pages, they call them in comics, which is in the actual comic book, these are vital actual bits. They tie into the story. Like, you can't skip them. They're part of the experience. But they're treated as like details of the alternate history from like extracts of texts. Well, the show is doing something similar. On the HBO website, after the first episode, they put up 4 PDFs that are meant to be like in-universe documents detailing part of the world building. So not all of you guys have heard of this. I can detail some of the stuff.
I've read them. I was blown away by them, frankly.
I was made aware of the fact that they were originally planning to do like post-episode video segments that were within the universe, but still sort of reflect like how Game of Thrones operated. Towards the end.
It reminds me of Lost used to have like this alternate reality games. But anyway, the actual back matter material for the episode, the first thing was an FBI memo about computers, and that was just detailing how at the ending of the original comic, which you don't need to have read to watch the show, but obviously it's building off, where a giant squid materialized in New York, killed millions, world peace ensued because everyone was so scared of the aliens together.
Spoilers, dude!
It's detailing how after that, everyone went kind of Luddite, because Dr. Manhattan, the blue superhuman godly figure who absconded from Earth at the end of the comic, the technology he was making with the other superhero, Ozymandias, everyone thought it gave you cancer, because the word was Dr. Manhattan gave you cancer if you were around him, Manhattan energies, which was fake news. It was all orchestrated. You can read about this in the comic, but people don't know that. And so there was like a technological pushback to technology after the fear of the squid and the fear of Manhattan energies. So that's, the watch stuff in the episode, how the 7th Cavalry were getting the old watch batteries, which are from like when people were fine with Manhattan and Ozymandias' technology. And so this FBI memo was trying to say, yeah, this was like saying we should use computers again. They're really useful, but everyone was totally spooked by computers after the events of the comic. The second thing was just like a Tulsa cinema. Tom Tit would like this very much, like a Kino art newsletter thing. And it was about Bass Reeves, who we see at the very start of the episode. He's the hero that gets the lawman that's done the town wrong at the start, who was a real guy. He was the first black US deputy marshal west of the Mississippi. He arrested Yeah, the original Lone Ranger. He arrested 3,000 felons, he shot 14 people in self-defense. Inspiration for the very white character, the Lone Ranger. The masked black crime fighter we saw at the start.
He stopped the mob from killing him, he just captured him non-lethally.
Not just dressed like a hero, he's dressed like Hooded Justice.
We're definitely going to get to that hooded justice note soon, because there's so much to talk about there. And the other two things were that Veidt declared dead newspaper article and an FBI report saying, please don't declare Veidt dead. And the report saying don't declare Veidt dead was saying, if you give this finality, it's going to set off all these people that hate Veidt, like the 7th Cavalry, the Rorschach worshippers, because they hate Veidt. They think he was behind Rorschach's death and all that. Details from those two documents. The Night Owl, the second, Dan Dryberg from the comic, was arrested after 9 years of superheroing around with Laurie Blake, the comedian, the feminine form of the comedian. This is actually what she was called, who is a character we're going to meet in the 3rd episode. Nobody really believed Rorschach's journal that Ozymandias was behind the squid and everything, besides very right-wing conspiracy kooks. Veidt's been missing since 2012, where another company bought out Veidt Industries. People assume he was assassinated or something. Veidt's new perfume and stuff bombed very hard that he tried to make about a new technological age because everyone went Luddite instead. And Veidt was behind President Redford getting 7 terms because he kept donating shitloads of money in the 80s and 90s for a democratic blue wave. But in the end, Redford, trying presumably not to be corrupt, passed a law diminishing donations, and apparently Veidt and Redford stopped getting on because Veidt was annoyed he couldn't lobby the government so much anymore. And yeah, so that's all the extra material we got in the back matter stuff. What are your thoughts on all that kind of thing?
You're forgetting Elvis being alive.
I did forget
Oh,
Elvis.
yeah.
Truly a strange touch.
Beg pardon.
It's talking about if Adrian Veidt suddenly reappears, then basically the FBI will look like idiots for declaring him dead. And they basically say, you remember what happened a couple years back when Elvis Presley walked into a bar in Vietnam? And this is real. And he sings like a medley of all of his songs that have blue in the title, which turns out to be 19 or something.
Speaking of Vietnam, did you notice the name of the bakery of our main character, Sister Night?
Milk and Hanoi.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I just wanted to say that Elvis doing a medley of all songs with blue in the title, for some reason that made me think of, like, did Dr. Manhattan bring Elvis back to life for some reason? Does he have some kind of like motive for that?
Blue is the clue. It's Blue's Clues.
Well, that is such a bizarre fucking... I'm sorry, that's just such a fucking ridiculous plot point. I love it. I love it.
I mean, there's other crazy stuff in those. Like, they mention that Nixonvilles are a recurring phenomenon. Like, lots of people who are angry at Redford and like loved Nixon have now made these little enclaves, like little Nixonvilles, apparently around the country or whatever. Anyway, that's not what I was going to say. The impression I got from those documents is that rather than necessarily fixing the world, it seems like the squid scheme has actually had the consequence of making the world go a bit crazy. Like, because this whole thing of having an apparent extra-dimensional alien attack, that has caused everyone to think, oh my god, our entire sense of reality has been thrown upside down. What could have caused this? Was it the computers? Was it this? Shut everything down. And that's just kind of, it's created this complete, like, adjunct from reality that everyone's now laboring under. So it's like, I think it makes sense for the tone of the TV show to be a little bit madder and weirder than the comic was. And that's the impression I kind of get. I think the TV show seems a bit more openly silly. I think the book was a bit more reserved with its silliness. Yeah,
like, Veidt in the book, you never see him having anything done, like, naked pat-downs and horseshoes and all that sort of shit.
Wait.
Way more.
You think Jeremy Irons was Veidt?
Dun, dun, dun.
Yes, I do.
Interesting.
Okay, if he's not Veidt, I'm gonna riot. I swear to God.
I mean, I don't know any spoilers or anything. Like, my guesses are as good as yours, but I think he's Dr. Manhattan because he's very pointedly not named or anything, and we see that castle he rode into is the exact same castle we see Manhattan create on Mars. He writes a play about Dr. Manhattan, the watchmaker's son. He gets very touched by getting the gift of a watch from his servant. his servants seem like synthetics or genetically engineered or something. They seem really off. And remember, at the end of the comic, Dr. Manhattan says he wants to create new life. And it seems like it'd be very Lindelofy to trick us like this. However, his personality is nothing like Dr. Manhattan at all. And he is pretty Ozymandias. So it could be misdirection.
The number one reason that I think that you're probably right is because that is how it goes in the source material of this television program, Doomsday Clock.
Lol.
For clarification, Doomsday Clock is another sequel to Watchmen the comic, except it's...
No, you can't say for clarification. It does not clarify anything. There are 2 sequels to Watchmen going on right now.
And they have nothing to do with each other.
They have nothing to do with each other, and yet they are the same story. So
I think it's somewhat generous to say that Doomsday Clock is going on in any meaningful sense. It's been delayed so much, it's practically at a standstill.
Over at DC Comics, Jeff Johns is a person, and he is writing this sequel to Watchmen about all the DC characters like Superman and Batman and all that interacting, and this whole thing about this reputation of... it's its own thing. The show is Damon Lindelof's sequel.
It's about Superman punching Dr. Manhattan in the fucking face.
Yeah.
It is.
As vengeance for DC rebooting their comics universe.
It's extremely tasteful.
I think actually, just the last note on Doomsday Clock to kind of stress what kind of story it is in comparison to this Watchmen TV show is, my understanding is the general premise is that the previous wave of DC Comics for the last couple of years was so grimdark and edgy because they were the life Dr. Manhattan was making or something, and Watchmen was edgy, and Jeff Johns wants to make comics not edgy, so he's saying all the edgy comics were literally from the Watchmen characters, and now we're going back to...
Just as a segue back to the show, I mean, Doomsday Clock has a black Rorschach, doesn't it?
And so does the show. Because Sister Night, I maintain, is by far the closest character we have to Rorschach. And I've got a few reasons for this. One is we get a direct reference when she's torturing that guy, and we get that swinging door thing with direct visual reference to a Rorschach scene. And in the trailer, she talks about how the world is just black and white, which is literally Rorschach's thing. It's, exemplified on his face. Well, his mask that he calls his face. She's very uncompromising. She's the main character, which I think... You can argue about the main character of the comic, but I think in terms of narrative function, it's definitely Rorschach.
Yeah, and her visits to Nixonville are a little bit like Rorschach's visits to Happy Harry's in the novel.
In the book, Rorschach is the one who's insisting there's a mask killer conspiracy that has to be unraveled. And in this episode, we see Angela arguing to Judd that some shit might be going on, something bigger might be happening, and Judd's like, whatever, I'm worried. So it seems like she might be in that Rorschach role of having to solve the mystery. So I really liked Angela pretty much as soon as she was introduced in that classroom scene, and she started going on this extended elaboration on how the horrific details of how she was shot, and she had to have a bullet removed from her. She had to be interrupted. I really like a little bit of characterization like that, where a character just starts behaving very strangely in a way that causes you to ask all kinds of questions about what's going on with them.
I was fist pumping when she said she's from Vietnam, because that's one of my favorite little details from the comics, how Vietnam became a state, and I really wanted the show to address that and kind of do some world building around that, so I was so happy that she's from Vietnam.
I think that's going to be really, really important.
Yeah.
Because do you know the name of the company that bought Adrian Veidt's estate? I don't know how to pronounce it either. It's like, True Industries, which is like the, basically just like the idea of Lady True being this historical figure of like, she's called the Vietnamese Joan of Arc by someone, I don't know. But basically the story is she was fighting off like Chinese occupation way back when in Vietnam. So I think there's an obvious tie to like American occupation of Vietnam in the 2019 Watchmen. It got me thinking about like, what does Veidt actually want to change in the world in 2019? And I thought like maybe it could be the occupation of Vietnam.
I'm not sure because Veidt isn't in the show.
Whatever.
The man in the high castle.
that's a good term for him. Also he might be just in some kind of mind palace created by Dr. Manhattan, and that's why the castles match up. It could well be playing Veidt, but there's something going on there.
my impression of it, because that's all I get from this episode is impressions, but I thought that like Veidt is trying to provoke Manhattan somehow, like similarly to the way he did in the novel. Like that's why he's writing a play about him. Maybe he's trying to misrepresent him or like make a point about him, and Manhattan is maybe reacting to that. But it could go in any direction.
Did you assume his servants were clones of Janie Slater and John Osterman, Dr. Manhattan? Because I thought that was pretty intuitive.
I didn't pick that up.
This is
Clones.
purely because they have black hair.
Yes, clones possibly of some sort of genetic or synthetic engineering. He had a pet cat that was a completely unique province back in was that 86 of the comic set?
Yeah.
I think it's possible that they are I don't know, people that whoever this man is created. But
yeah.
I do think there is something to the idea that it might be Ozymandias trying to provoke Dr. Manhattan, perhaps by creating his own life.
Yeah, because Dr. Manhattan ends the comic saying, I'm off to create my own life, but Ozymandias is there when he says that, and Ozymandias likes to one-up people, and he's got a real idol fixation, and I'm sure, part of that's directed at Dr. Manhattan. This is also why I think he might be trying to Dr. Manhattan himself, to a degree. Like, he's writing a play and he's getting the watch. I think he might be trying to mantle this role, perhaps literally in future episodes, because, that's what he did with Alexander the Great. I could see him thinking, if my plans aren't working so much, John got blown apart by this subatomic what's-it, can I do the same thing to myself and get his powers? Because Dr. Manhattan being on Mars feels weird to me. At the end of the comic, he left for another galaxy to go create new life elsewhere. Why would he just go so close to home, to Mars? So maybe that blue guy on Mars isn't even Manhattan. It's Ozzy Manhattan.
Dr. Mars.
If I keep throwing theories at the wall, one of them is going to stick, I swear.
Speaking of theories, we mentioned Ozymandias' cat, right? I just want to say on the reread of the book I did at the weekend. Okay, I came to the bit I think in the last chapter where Ozymandias tries to get rid of Manhattan by putting him back in the intrinsic field subtractor, and Bubastis, the cat, gets caught up in it, and that just puts me on this idea that maybe 33 years later, or however many years later, Bubastis is gonna kind of re-emerge as a disembodied nervous system somewhere, and then just be like the god cat, like the Dr. Cat Hatton, Dr. Manhattan. So maybe that's the key to the show. There's a new Manhattan and it's feline.
Oh my god. What if you're both right? What if it's not Ozymandias and it's not Dr. Manhattan? It is in fact Bubastis in a humanoid body. That's why the butler doesn't know how to cut a cake. And for that matter, that's why he only wants to take a single, taste of it. It's because he's a cat.
There is a line in one of the extra documents that HBO put out after the show, which suggests that Ozymandias and Bubastis, they have some sort of intimate bond. Do you get what I'm saying?
No.
Oh?
Lab?
Are you saying that he jumped into Bubastis's body, or transferred their consciousness?
Yeah, he air quotes jumps into Bubastis's body. This is the right-wing New Frontiersman is suggesting that him and Bubastis have. So there might be some genetic mixing going on there. If you catch what I mean.
Human cat hybrids. Is that? So we're just turning into series 2 of Doctor Who now, aren't we?
Yeah.
Do you get the impression that all this Jeremy Irons stuff is like the rest of the show? I totally agree with the writers that non-readers of the comic or watchers of the movie or whatever can totally we're all meant to feel lost and on the back foot from this episode. That's cool. I think everyone's mostly on the same foot, apart from little world-building things. But the Jeremy Irons scenes feel to me like this is very much like us comic readers are saying, oh, it could be this character, it could be this character, it's connected to this thing in the comic. I wonder how non-comic readers are reacting to the Jeremy Irons stuff, which must just seem so kind of adrift, interestingly, without that knowledge.
Yeah.
It must basically just be it must come off to newbies Lynchian randomness, mustn't it? When the guy when Mr. Crookshanks or Mr. Phillips offers him a horseshoe, it's just seems like these kind of completely abstract kind of circular. Yeah, Dougie Jones, or something else you could compare it to. Audrey in season 3. She's in this her own little enclosed kind of scenario, isn't she? It doesn't really cross over with the rest of the show. Like, it must seem like something really weird like that and disembodied.
Maybe it is. We don't know. That's the thing. We
Good
still
point.
don't know. And the world of Watchmen is wild and weird enough that it could be something strange and esoteric like that. But that being said, I don't think that it's a very useful show to watch if you've never read the book or never seen the movie.
Yeah, I don't. It's not a gatekeeping thing. It's just like, I think the show presumably will work. Like, HBO wouldn't greenlight something that just people that watched a Zack Snyder movie 10 years ago, or just people that read a comic, albeit like the biggest, most famous, best one. You know, like, this is a show, I think Lindelof described it as not for the masses, what did he say? For the stadiums, for the arenas, compared to The Leftovers, which was for, you know, the dive bars, the rooms where only 3 people can fit in. So, yeah, the comic, I think saying the comic helps is misguided because it makes it sound like work. The comic is brilliant, and the show hopefully will be brilliant. Why not have 2 brilliant things in your life? Gig?
Yes?
Do you have any theories you want to share?
You asked me to share my theory.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Okay. So I was talking with Neo about that mystery old man who kind of summons Angela, and who we see as a child at the beginning of the episode. And I was kind of wondering, like, well, could it be? Okay, this is going to sound like a total reach at the moment, but could it be that this guy was at some point some iteration of Hooded Justice? Could it be that, you know, is that first scene essentially his superhero origin story? And at some point prior to becoming an old man, could he have been a hood-wearing superhero? Now, before you go after me and say, hang on, Gig, in the comic we can clearly see that Hooded Justice is a white dude. Okay, you can see the little rings around his eyes or whatever, and also they mentioned that he might be a Nazi as well. That kind of right. I need to get my thoughts in order here. My first thought, before being reminded of those facts, is that maybe the original inspiration for the Hooded Justice costume revolves around the Klan and the idea of appropriating the iconography of the Klan hood and the lynch noose into some sort of like anti kind of racist kind of vigilante costume. But then obviously that wouldn't really make sense if it was some white dude or whatever doing it, so it wouldn't really be appropriative. So that had me wondering, I don't know, maybe a black guy did it first and then some white guy stole his idea and did it, and there were 2 Hooded Justices. and that's the thing. It's getting a bit convoluted at this point. I have to be said.
Yeah, if you focus less on the specific details and we think more in the broader things, like the show is pushing Hooded Justice a lot on that fake show in a show and on the posters and things. And the Bass Reeves like movie, you can totally see how this would play into a Hooded Justice origin. He's literally by a lynch and all that stuff at the very end of the episode. And like appropriation is the big theme of the show. Like everyone keeps saying this and it's clear in the episode. Appropriating, you know, something. Appropriating a Klan hood, or, you know, even the idea of lynching, that feels very... I won't say Lynchian, I'll say Lindelofian.
You know what? I might be misremembering this because it's been about 3 years, I think, since the last time I read the book. And is there a part in the book where they discuss the possibility that there's another Hooded Justice? Because when Giggs said that, I felt like, oh yeah, that was something in the book, wasn't it?
There's not a point where they think there's 2, but there's a point in Hollis Mason, the first Night Owl's like tell-all under the hood, where he's guessing who Hooded Justice was, and he's not totally settled. And so the idea of different people could be Hooded Justice is kind of in that.
There is some ambiguity to, you know, the origin of Hooded Justice and who the guy is, and one cope thing that I've been using is that it's possible that the person who joined the Minutemen as Hooded Justice might not actually be the first person who was sighted wearing a hood. You know, there could be more than one person.
Like a Night Owl situation.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of Night Owl, I totally think Don Johnson, the dead police chief, was the 3rd Night Owl, because he had that owl mug and he had under the hood that book I was just talking about from the first Night Owl, and he had an owl ship. So, yeah, I'm not married to that, but yeah.
They showed that photo of him as a kid with his dad, and I feel like we're going to get childhood flashbacks of Judd. And maybe, if putting aside the theory that he's night owl or whatever at the moment, it could be maybe he's just a big fan. I feel like we'll get some insight into what were his interests or pathologies over his life, and maybe this fascination with the night owls might be one of them. Hence his owning owl cups and stuff.
Yeah, because he's like the same age as Dan. Like, he's around 70, which is what Dan's age would be. And remember, Dan's in federal prison. That's what the HBO documents revealed. So I'm not sure if he was really Night Owl 3, but yeah, certainly a fan. And he has the owl ship, or at least a replica of it, which is just confounding.
Yeah, the mug and the ship sort of made me think that, like, maybe Dan is secretly consulting with the police. But not only am I not married to that theory, I'm barely on speaking terms with it. But at the very least, they're possibly, like, stealing Dan's inventions, or, like, they went through his house and got all his blueprints and shit, or whatever.
Speaking of Don Johnson, who's obviously mirroring the comedian from the comic, who is the character murdered at the start, and that sets off the investigation into a conspiracy, and we get lots of flashbacks about how he connected with the other characters and stuff. I assumed at the end, because notice he went alone. He told his wife, I'll get another cop to drive me. I've had a bit to drink for safety or whatever. And then he went alone. That's very suspicious to me. He went alone when he heard the cop shot at the start, woke up.
Yeah.
Was he going to put him back to sleep for some reason?
That's what I thought for sure, until he died.
He also had this really noticeable grimace on his face. Like, he was practically telegraphing that he had sinister intentions.
Hmm.
And I mean, this is Nash Bridges we're talking about. And you know who wrote for Nash Bridges? You should check his IMDb page to find out.
Are you going to elaborate? Can I get an elab?
Damon Lindelof wrote for Nash Bridges. It comes full circle.
Yeah, just like the way he sort of forlornly puts his uniform on, it made me think like he really wants to be found in that uniform, like it's a statement that he was being hanged.
Actually, it did seem possibly that he was prepared to not come back from wherever he was going. There was something a bit funereal about it. I mean, I might be wrong. It might be he was just going off to kill someone, but maybe he didn't. Maybe he wasn't sure he would come back alive. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, what do you think that weird light was immediately before he got hot? There's like this weird kind of bluish light that zooms across the screen and then we cut away. I'm just wondering, like, could it be,
like flickering, wasn't it?
Something like that. Yeah, it was flickering as well. I know. I framed pause and went through it. I'm just wondering, could that be Dr. Manhattan come to get him or something?
Could be. Some. What I thought of was how sometimes in sci-fi and crime dramas they'll treat hypnosis as something that you can just do with a flashing light. What if that's somebody's old superpower box light thing that they used to fight crime back in the 70s, and now it's been reappropriated to trap this cop?
Hypnosis is an interesting angle.
Hypnosis feels very relevant to what this show is doing, I think, because like you got Looking Glass's entire shtick feels very brainwashing.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah. I loved that modern update of the Rorschach tests with the pod.
Let's not forget, psychics are real in this world, in this universe, because you've got the whole psychic brain shockwave and shit. So there might very much be a thing.
Hey, is her is the kid psychic? I wasn't actually able to tell. There's something going on there, I think.
Oh, do you mean Topher? Are you basing this on the fact that he could tell his mum wanted to hit that other kid? Is that who you're referring that from?
Not exclusively. There was also a weird point where he touches the windshield while there's a squid on top of it, and the squid like moves around. I don't know. It was an odd scene, and I thought, oh, there's psychic kid.
With the squid, I don't think Topher dissolved the squid or anything there. I think with the squids, all the squids that fall from the sky, it seems like they basically melt and dissolve into water as soon as they land. And I think that is an after effect of the teleportation process. They mention in the HBO back matter that the prime squid back in the day at the end of the book, that one also kind of dissolved after it landed. And Ozymandias does say that like you can't teleport stuff without it being sort of basically going splat as soon as it arrives. So I think that's something to do with all that.
And also they don't want it to stick around because then like scientists can analyze it and do all their shit to it.
To be fair, psychic kid, that's not a bad theory. It might come true.
Notice all their kids were white.
Ish.
wonder if there's some sort of adoption thing going on that's got racial dynamics to it, stemming from the whole history of the town or something. I don't know what's going on there. In a lot of ways, there seems to be this sort of, in this kind of present of the show, there seems to be this not exactly inversion, but sort of a shake-up of how white people's role in the world. Like, you had that whole traffic stop sequence at the start with kind of the roles kind of reversed, with the white person really nervously putting his hands on the steering wheel and stuff, and getting kind of browbeaten by this overbearing black cop. And it just seems like this whole thing, it's like, possibly in the reviews or the previews or whatever, like the comparison was raised that the show is depicting kind of the liberal dystopia of every racist's worst nightmares. It's kind of this endless liberal regime. It's like,
you need to wait 6 months to buy a gun.
Yeah, it's like when Obama was president, you have the conservatives going like, he's going to bring 1,000 years of liberal darkness. Well, in this timeline, Robert Redford has brought 30 years of like liberal dominance or whatever. So it's like, I don't know how many years it is, but it's a long time.
Yeah. Reparations for Tulsa, black people in Tulsa.
Yeah, the restrictions on the gun are literally what gets the police officer killed. It's like a very strange statement.
Yeah, and we have that panda guy who seems to be very stringent about not being willy-nilly with the guns. He kind of...
I like panda.
Yeah, he has a go at Judd for kind of authorizing full weapons usage because it's gonna kickstart the war again. He seems quite anti-gun on the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Wonder what his deal is.
What do you think of these reparations in the show?
Oh, I was gonna say, good idea.
See, I think I get the impression that what the show might possibly be doing. I mean, certainly the show seems... Well, I'm partially going off comments that Lindelof has made here, but I think the perspective of the show towards this whole regulatory sort of liberals in government doing their best to try and like make everything nice and safe and stuff, and very sort of like putting band-aids on everything and stuff. I get the sense the show is somewhat critical of that, and with the these retrogradations somewhat being a part of that. Like, you can throw money at a problem per se. You can help black people like compete in a market or whatever, but you've still got this kind of capitalist situation. You've still got, you've got the envy that comes from that. You've still got this market that's fundamentally unfair. Like, you haven't actually cured the problem at the heart of the society. You've just sort of like, you've tried to sort of balance the scales a little bit. And whereas Lindelof's quite odd response to this is the idea that we should balance out Democrats with Republicans or whatever and have some conservative influence on government, it seems like the more pressing statement that's coming out, perhaps unintentionally, is that you need to actually go a lot further than, say, Robert Redford is going in terms of reforming society.
It's interesting that that big article that a couple of years ago kicked off, reparations in the discourse, one of the actual arguments raised in that is that would erase white guilt, because it's like, we gave all this money to black people, which will societally and like culturally alleviate white people feeling guilty about, racism or events like the Tulsa massacre in the past. And I just find that a really odd, like fascinating argument to make in favor of them. Like that the argument for giving all these black people money is so white people don't feel weird around
that seems
people.
That seems a bit dangerous to me almost, because if certainly it might get rid of any sort of sense of lingering guilt, but like that it wouldn't necessarily get rid of like the resentment. Like, it seems like what would happen there is that we fixed racism, we gave you all your money, so you can't even complain anymore. It's like that. Just to clarify for any listeners, the article that we're referring to is The Case for Reparations by Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's a bit old but yeah, it came out.
It's a fascinating read, whatever your situation on reparations is, because it's kind of like the article on it.
It's more of it's kind of a history of injustice against sort of African Americans over the course of like the century, with the Tulsa race massacre being a prominent feature.
And even though Coates is of course a Marvel writer and this is a DC property, it's still very relevant to the discussion. Yeah,
because the point in it is it wasn't just events like the Tulsa massacre of 1921 that like white people have to feel sorry for. Like, as recently as now, there are active institutional things that have negative effects on black people's ability to compete financially and all that kind of thing. But speaking of the Tulsa massacre, what did we think of that opening sequence? That riff on Superman's origin, I should say.
Yeah, that was really extreme.
I thought the music was fantastic. Like, I
Yes.
just love those like stabbing kind of synths and stuff like that. Actually, it reminded me of a Hideo Kojima game a little bit. But I thought that whole sequence, yeah, it was just deeply unsettling. I was surprised at the brutality of it. Honestly, just showing people just get shot down in cold blood and stuff. It was really, really brutal.
I love that the effect I'm seeing in like the reception online to this was everyone thinking, "Whoa, this is messed up," as part of the alternate history that the rest of the episode is all about, and then googling it and oh shit, this was completely this bit's real. This bit completely happened, and it's just it's not well taught. The Superman thing I thought was really interesting because it's it's chaotic, exploding world. Let's say parents put their baby on a transportation thing out to try and save him. Was that it? Like,
And they put a little message saying "watch" over this boy as well, just like as a sign whoever finds the boy, she kind of needs to kind of take him in, like the Kents do with Supes and whatever.
And we think this may have been the first superhero in this world, which was Hooded Justice. So it's all very interesting.
There's something to be said for taking that sort of sci-fi kind of fantasy mythos or whatever, and just bringing it right down and grounding it in the actual real life circumstances, like the actual real life analog of that. And kind of, because it's like, we don't need to kind of make up another planet to tell this story. This sort of stuff actually happens.
Yeah, and I love the just the contrast of like the movie, the anti-Birth of a Nation, Trust in the Law, it was called. The juxtaposition of that sort of like nice sort of pacifying story with like the reality which is happening outside, which is that like there's a very real danger.
Yeah. And it's interesting because at the end of the episode, we get the juxtaposition of that with how Judd is the white police chief that, you know what I'm saying?
Your standards for wordplay climb further and further every day, it has to be said.
Milk and Hanoi inspired me. That's all I'm going off.
I love the final shot of the drop of blood on the sheriff's badge. It's such a brazen statement, isn't it? Like, this isn't your grandma's Watchmen. We're doing this.
I wasn't even expecting it. I was trying to read something on the badge, thinking, what's it trying to say? And then the blood dropped in the exact thing of the smiley that is the Watchmen symbol and the icon that starts off the comic. Amazing.
It was pleasant. It was a little obvious, but in a good way. It's here it is. You're watching Watchmen now. Although. There was other parts earlier that also visually referred back to that, but I'm having trouble remembering the precise ones. I feel like at least once we see that same basic shape in Looking Glass's mask.
Yeah, a lot of shapes in Looking Glass's mask, don't we?
How was that?
But
was this digitally done? His mask reflections? Like, what was going on there? It looked amazing.
That was impressive.
It seems the show has its equivalent of cool Rorschach mask effect in Looking Glass's mirror mask, and the way in which that creates this kaleidoscope of whatever he's looking at is so fucking cool. Like, I love the shot, like the Nazi swastikas when they're in the pod and they all kind of swarming over his face. It just looks so cool.
Yeah, I imagined you'd love that. Speaking of cool Rorschach masks, I was howling at the speech of the 7th Cavalry that the police were watching, which is reappropriating some famous Rorschach journal lines from the comic, which Rorschach is kind of poetic and lyrical in the comic. Like, he's not the most well-spoken chap, but he's got a certain lilt, and method to his words that's certainly appealing, and they're just inserting these weird modern bits into it, like liberal tears and the time for retribution, blah, blah, blah. Oh, and that time is near.
It's exactly the sort of thing that you read on TV every fucking day.
Yeah.
And fittingly, this is also a bunch of masked anonymous people wearing, costumes based on an Alan Moore comic.
Oh, yeah, V for Vendetta, of course. Sorry,
yeah.
it took me a second.
Good point.
Yeah.
It took me a few seconds to...
I love the crudeness of how they've rewritten Rorschach's kind of text, and it just made me laugh so much. It's just ridiculous, but great. I possibly having them literally say liberal tears might have been a bit on the nose, but it's fun, and I like that they're not I like that it's impossible to mistake that for actual Rorschach dialogue there. Like, it wasn't even grammatically. The time is near. Oh god, that was just great.
In the original comic, in a fairly early re-release, Alan Moore has an author's note where he's talking about writing Rorschach. He was committed; he could not strawman this character at all. This character had to be written completely with dignity, I guess you could say. So conservatives absolutely can latch onto this character and idolize him, and that's the point. Moore isn't trying to, unduly stereotype. He's trying to just all these ideologies have their place in the comic, and the reader projects onto them and agrees with whichever one they will. But in the show, using a term like liberal tears, I don't feel that dedication to objectivity, kind of, if you know, like that's very much liberal. Wrote the liberal tears, Ryan.
At the same time, as much as Moore treats Rorschach with a lot of dignity and makes him kind of you feel bad for him at various points. He's got humanity. You've also got stuff like in the back matter of the comic, you've got pages from the New Frontiersman which lampoons the whole conservative rhetorical style quite savagely, I think, and all the kind of propaganda phrases, the commie Marxist left-wing Russian loons and stuff. All of that gets kind of used and deployed, and then you've got that wonderful parody of conservative political cartoons with a crying Statue of Liberty in the corner and stuff. So I don't think the book is completely free of maybe a bit of bias where it comes to sort of that sort of stuff. But I do agree. I do see where you're coming from.
The book politically, I think, there's stuff like that. But as far as the characters, I think they really do try and make them three-dimensional. And like Rorschach is treated, I think, with a lot of humanity. Even like Rorschach is a racist. You go back and you read these monologues and actually pay attention to what he's saying, because the movie cut a lot of these lines, which I think is the heart of some of the pushback here. But he's a racist, he's a misogynist, all these things. That said, part of the complication of the comic is he's very much the hero in some ways. He's narratively positioned as this a lot of the time. He's a complicated character, and this is the appeal. The people that idolize him are obviously reading the comic in a certain way that people can find silly or misguided, but the point is kind of the projection and how people can appropriate it. Is it even appropriation? It's just people interpreting him differently, I suppose. And so it's interesting in the show to see this whole theme of reappropriation of the character. It's such a lovely meta thing, how it ties in. This is what the show is doing to the comic. It's reappropriating it to tweak it a little and then tell a new, completely different story. And the appeal of the show to me so far is from the first scene, it's got all these things on its mind that aren't from the comic. These are new themes, and it's evolving the comic to tell these things, which is so much more in the spirit of what the comic was doing than just doing a story again about like a mutually assured destruction thing or whatever.
Are any of you familiar with the musical Oklahoma? Because I'm not.
I got some kind of stuff about like Don Johnson's character. He seemed to feel like some kind of flippant, like he looks down on Black Oklahoma, which he downplays. It's not an overt thing, but like he said, their heart's not in it. And he's pretty much jealous because he was the main character of Oklahoma when he was a boy. I took that as basically to mean like him as a white dude, he feels like some ownership over Oklahoma, and he like resents this Black Oklahoma. And there's that ominous sign on the street which says like Black Oklahoma final performance. I think that's a very that's an omen for sure.
They mentioned he played the good guy in Oklahoma when he was younger, and yet he shares the name of the bad guy in Oklahoma. Yes. He's called Judd, and they flag that up with the song lyrics playing at the end over his his corpse. Poor Judd is dead. So there seems to be something going on there. Like maybe that is suggesting that there are two sides to this guy.
Oh yeah, he was snorting something at the dinner table.
Oh yeah, confidence.
That was definitely
I wonder, is it just coke, or could it be some new weird kind of alt history drug? Like maybe it's like maybe nostalgia is now a drug that you take instead of a perfume.
I can see that.
Oh, wow. Nostalgia's like the perfume, cologne and all that from the original comic that suited the 80s, where they were wistfully looking back on times.
Bit of Unforgettable playing during that was great.
Perfect.
The music in this we could probably go on about for an hour and a half on its own.
Little thing I know. I noticed with the Rorschach guys, the cavalry, with them they were ripping the watch batteries out of those watches, and it just struck me that the image of ripping apart a watch quite savagely is a bit like the inverse of the stuff we got in the comic, with beautifully assembling a watch and all its intricacies.
Oh, yeah.
So with this imagery of people kind of ripping the watches apart, it's a bit like a statement of intent, isn't it? Like we're taking it apart, we're pulling it down.
Yeah. On the topic of these batteries, my understanding is they never caused cancer. The stuff that was causing cancer was Ozymandias, I think, putting something in the gas or something to these people.
He exposed them to radiation,
Yeah. So these batteries are fine, which is so comedian style. It's such a dark joke that all this fuss over cancer-causing technology it was completely fine. No one had to stop using it.
One more thing, they showed Dollar Bill on the wall of that Nixonville guy's house or whatever, and is that? I wonder if is it gonna link to the banks and stuff like that? Are we gonna get a more financial angle on stuff in the rest of the plot? Because that seems like an interesting direction.
The Dollar Bill was such a minor part of the original comic.
Yeah.
So he was part of the first group of superheroes in the 30s and 40s, the Minutemen, and the banks made a superhero because they wanted like a marketing thing, so they just got this guy to dress up and go pretend to fight crime and then fight some actual crime or whatever.
Because his cape got snagged in the door.
Yeah. And then the robbers shot him.
I thought that was very like Angela looks over at that poster and she sort of realizes in that moment that she's sort of wearing the face of the enemy. You know, she's a tool of the state. Which is, I think, kind of what Lindelof is going for with the whole thing, is that like these reparations, the majority black police force, it's all kind of like a mechanism to contain black people.
Yes.
You know?
Absolutely.
Which is why the framing of the scene where the 7th Cavalry talks to the police station, it's sort of framed like you have that big screen overlooking the hall and all this negative space in the middle. It's kind of like the police are all they're an unwilling audience to the cavalry. And then you cut to the reverse angle and it has this sign. It says, in the service of others. That's like the police motto, in the service of others, which makes me think like, you know, all these black police officers, they're not part of an institution which is like serving their best interests. That's what in the service of others means in the context of this show, you know? So I love the novel. It had all these like double meaning phrases and the show has very much taken that on board.
One more thing on the topic of police mottos. What do you think of the police actually getting up and saying, quis custodiet, the custodian, whatever, nos custodius? I see them saying, who watches the Watchmen? We do. It's a bit stonecutters, isn't it? It's the stonecutters.
Yeah, I thought of stonecutters. Absolutely. Who keeps the metric system down?
Another thing I just have to say, the music that we've hailed a couple of times, so it's by, the two men that are 9 Inch Nails, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. I think this is the best score they've done since the show Social Network in 2010, which I think is the best score of like the last 10, 15 years in cinema. It's just, this score was popping like crazy. I loved it. And they're going to do 3 album soundtracks for the show. Every 3 episodes is getting a complete album soundtrack. So they're making that much music. And yeah, I was absolutely loving it.
Just notice Judd foreshadows his death earlier on. He says, well, it's my funeral. And then at the end of the episode, he's dead. So there you go.
And also when he's, as you mentioned earlier, the way that the police are sort of being treated as an audience to what's going on with the cavalry, then Judd steps out underneath them as though he's like the leader of the cavalry. Which I assumed was going to be the reveal at the end of this episode. But
one more comic connection, the suicide pills, that's from the comic, isn't it? Like, remember Ozymandias forces one into the mouth of that fake assassin? So yeah, it's fun to spot little connections like that. I caught that immediately.
Angela's password to her house is 1985, which is the year Watchmen is, of course, set.
Holy shit.
What got
Nice
me
spot.
was that on the panel that she types it into, it's a 4-digit password, 1985, but there's 5 asterisks signifying the characters. So I don't know what the hell that was about, but I watched it and I was like, wait, what? Something's wrong, so I rewound. And I don't know if it's like an error, is something going wrong with time? But
yeah, it's interesting, because that's one more number than 1984, which is what Redford's government feels a lot like.
yeah.
Real question is, though, were there any croutons?